A United States attorney only has one client, but it's a big one, the United States. I'll talk with United States Attorney William J. Ihlenfeld II right now on The Law Works.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Closed captioning for The Law Works is made possible by a grant from the Monongalia County Bar Association to support legal information and education for all West Virginians. The Law Works is made possible by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and legal system, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. By the generous support of Software Systems Incorporated, a West Virginia company established in 1975, providing high-end support services, programming, and consulting for county government AS400 mid-range computer systems, as well as PC-based systems. And by viewers like you.
A United States attorney has broad and very significant responsibilities and power. My guest is the United States Attorney for the Northern District of West Virginia, William J. Ihlenfeld II. Bill, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here.
We hear on the news all the time about the United States Attorney for this district or that district or the other district is holding a press conference announcing momentous things or telling awful stories sometimes. Just what is it that the United States Attorney does?
Well, the United States Attorney, and there are 93 of us throughout the country, serves as the chief law enforcement officer for all federal matters within his or her district. And so the Northern District of West Virginia is made up of 32 counties, and I serve as the chief federal law enforcement officer for that district. We prosecute all federal crimes that occur within the district. We also represent the United States in court either as a plaintiff or as a defendant when the United States is a party to a civil action. And we also help to collect debts that are owed to the United States. Those are the three primary duties that I hold as the United States Attorney. And I've got a tremendous staff that I work with, and they do most of the work for me throughout the district. But
you actually do try cases yourself. You are in the courtroom.
I do. I enjoy keeping a docket of cases. I think that keeps me in the know, so to speak, with what's going on. Helps me to better understand what my staff does on a daily basis by being involved like that.
Your office is really a law firm.
It is.
You have offices around the 32 county district.
We have 4 staffed offices. We have offices in Wheeling, which is where our headquarters is located. We have an office in Clarksburg, in Elkins, and in Martinsburg. We have the federal courthouses in each of those locations, and we handle matters throughout the district.
What is your office most concerned with? What are your priorities?
We probably spend more time on drug trafficking than anything else, and so that would be at the top of the list. National security is right at the top of the list as well. We also deal with gun crimes, financial fraud, healthcare fraud, but drug trafficking is probably what we spend the most time on.
I'm kind of curious, you said national security. Are the terrorists standing behind us? Are they under the beds? I mean, what do you do?
Well, there's only so much I can say about that because we're investigating matters all the time. In West Virginia, we're fortunate that we don't have the same issues that they might face in the Southern District of New York or perhaps the District of Washington, D.C. But that doesn't mean we don't have to stay on top of things. We have to be vigilant. And so what we do is we work together with our federal, state, and local partners. We have a joint terrorism task force. We meet on a regular basis. We're constantly exchanging information about threats or perceived threats within the district. Within my office, I have an intelligence specialist. He does nothing but work on gathering intelligence and working with the FBI and other federal and state partners to make sure that if there are any threats, we're on top of it and we're aware of it and we're responding accordingly.
You mentioned task force. You also use state and local task force members with regard to the drug crimes that you were talking about.
We do, and that's really been a priority of mine since I came in about 18 months ago. is to work closely with state and local partners. I was a county prosecutor, and all the cases that I worked on before I became U.S. Attorney were because of the good work of local police departments, county sheriffs, and state troopers. And so with these drug task forces that we work on, we also combine efforts with federal, state, and local agencies, and it really works well. In fact, we just started an interdiction initiative in the Northern Panhandle. We call it the Mountaineer Highway Interdiction Team, and that's a combination of state, local, and federal agencies working together to try and stop the flow of drugs into the state of West Virginia.
Can you talk a little bit about the flow of drugs into West Virginia? How does it get here? Where does it come from? What kind of drugs are involved?
We see a lot of pills. We see a lot of heroin coming into the state. We see a lot of cocaine coming into the state. Most of the major drug investigations that my office works on involves a source of supply that's not in West Virginia. In other words, for example, with heroin, most of the heroin that we deal with in the Northern Panhandle and in north central West Virginia comes from the Pittsburgh area. Most of the heroin that we deal with in the Eastern Panhandle comes from Baltimore. What we do when we investigate a case is to try and work our way up the chain. We're not satisfied with convicting the street level dealer. Our goal always is to work up the chain and to try and identify the source of supply and take that person off.
I think one thing people don't realize is, regularly realize, is that when they are using these drugs that are brought into West Virginia, the money is going out of state typically, but it pays for a lot of really awful things that people just don't appreciate.
It does. It goes out of state, and sometimes it goes out of the country. It helps to finance terrorist organizations in other countries, in the Middle East. And so it's not just a harm to those of us here in West Virginia, but it's a harm to the rest of the country and the rest of the world.
I was stunned when I first realized that we were financing terrorism. People who would just say, I'm just a recreational drug user, I party on Saturday night or something like that. Yeah, well, you're doing some danger to yourself, but you're also putting the world at risk by putting money into that chain to buy the automatic weapons and the bombs and the things that are killing people all over the planet.
That's true, and it's not just heroin. It's marijuana, and it's cocaine. It's all types of drugs. Ultimately, that money goes somewhere, in all likelihood, to do something bad. And one example of that is the financing of terrorist organizations throughout the world.
I thought heroin was dead. When did it come back?
At least within the past 10 years, and I go back to my time as a county prosecutor up in the Northern Panhandle. We started to see a comeback of heroin in Brooke County and Hancock County, and recently there's actually been an increase in the heroin supply out of Mexico. It's become more profitable for Mexico to work with heroin, and you see it coming from Mexico across the country over to Pittsburgh and Baltimore and other major cities on the East Coast. And it's highly addictive, and it's deadly, and we're losing a lot of young people due to overdose deaths.
I've been involved in a couple of heroin cases as a defense attorney, and I was surprised it's no longer back alley tourniquets and hypodermic needles that people are using. They're not cooking it in a spoon anymore. It's coming in bales of stamps, they call them.
Stamp bags, that's what we see a lot of, and sometimes we'll see it in straws as well.
Straws.
In straws around this part of the state. So we're seeing it in different forms, and it not only finances these other organizations that we talked about, but it also leads to an increase in property crime and in violent crime. We're seeing more home invasions. We're seeing more property thefts. It really flows from the pills. Folks get addicted to opiates and to painkillers, and when they can no longer afford to purchase the painkillers to feed their addiction, they go down to heroin because it's not as expensive. And then when somebody doesn't have enough heroin to keep them going, they get sick, and then they get desperate, and we see folks do some pretty desperate things and commit violent crimes.
In one area, you were talking about home invasions and property crimes. It seems that there are a lot of guns stolen to finance heroin habits. At least in the cases I've been involved in, there's always an element of somebody taking mom and dad's guns or something of that sort and selling them to get money to go out and buy more heroin.
And that's one of the number one things we see stolen when folks invade homes and steal things. They steal guns. In fact, in Harrison County, we recently had a major prosecution where we indicted 21 defendants and convicted 21 defendants, and it was a major heroin and gun trafficking conspiracy in Clarksburg and the Northview section of Harrison County. And it involved first a heroin investigation, but it led to guns being sold to undercover agents and resulted in a major prosecution, which put a significant dent in the heroin trafficking trade in that part of the state.
Something we ought to point out, you at home need to know this, either for yourself or for your children. I hope I'm not giving anything away here. If you are a drug user, almost certainly the police authorities know about you. They may not have taken any action against you yet, and if they don't know about you yet, they will. All they have to do is arrest one person who's dealing drugs or who is using drugs, and they will talk about everybody else that they know who's buying, selling, using. And they will. They always start off saying, I'm not going to rat out my friends, but they always do. It's part of the prosecution process. There are, should we call them incentives, built into the system to get them to talk, and they do. We're talking about the work of the United States Attorney. My guest is the United States Attorney for the Northern District of West Virginia, William J. Ihlenfeld II. I'm Dan Ringer, and this is The Law Works. Talk about pills. You were talking about they start off on pills. When they can't afford the pills, they go to heroin. What kind of pills are we dealing with?
Oxycontins, primarily, but we see other types. We see painkillers, and they're coming up from Florida and South Carolina, but they're also sometimes coming from pharmacies right here in the Northern District of West Virginia. We have some pharmacies within our district that prescribe a lot of painkillers. And what it does, from Florida, from that perspective, it brings, in one case that we're working on now, hundreds of thousands of pills were brought up from Florida and South Carolina to West Virginia and to Ohio to be trafficked here. And these aren't, they're getting them from doctors, they're getting them from a legitimate source, but then they're being used in an illegitimate way once they get up here to West Virginia and Ohio and Pennsylvania.
How are people getting involved with these, with the OxyContin drugs?
Well, as far as the pill trafficking rings, we tend to see a leader of an organization who will see that there's a profit that can be made in trafficking in these pills, and that leader will recruit people to become involved in the organization, to go around and doctor shop. That's a term that's used quite a bit in these cases, where they'll go around from doctor to doctor to doctor to see if they can get a prescription for a particular painkiller. And if they're successful, then they can go to the pharmacy and get their prescription filled. And states are still trying to figure out the best way to communicate with one another, to try and prevent that from happening, to try and prevent people from being able to go from one doctor to another or from one pharmacy to another. But it's highly profitable, and as long as there's some profit there, you're probably going to have some people who are interested in getting involved in that type of a business.
I'd like to suggest to you that there is a program that is, I'm going to call it in rotation because it seems to be aired from time to time, on the Current network. You have to be on cable or perhaps on satellite for TV. The Current network has a program called the OxyContin Express, and it is a hour-long program about the exact problem that you were describing, Bill. Doctors and pharmacies in Florida that are writing scripts, filling scripts for the OxyContin type drugs, and how they are being brought into West Virginia and Kentucky. And the program focuses specifically on that. And it's a wonderful opportunity to see how the drugs affect the users, how the drugs are obtained, how they're moved, and the other problems they show in the community, or they cause in the community. So I highly recommend that. It's called the OxyContin Express. If you get a chance to take a look at it, do. When I first got involved in some of these cases, I was dumbfounded by the volume of drugs that are moving. How do people function when they're using drugs in these quantities?
I was dumbfounded as well. I hadn't seen anything like this on the state level, but when I became U.S. Attorney, I quickly became aware that there are a large number of these cases that are going on. We have other open investigations just like the one I told you about, and I'm not sure how they function, but once they get addicted, it's hard to get off the drugs, and as I said, sometimes they'll find other drugs that are less expensive and may be easier to obtain.
What other kinds of cases or cases have you been working on in your tenure as U.S. Attorney?
We've, in the Department of Justice as a whole, has placed a great emphasis on healthcare fraud. We have worked on those cases within our district, and in fact, last year, the Department of Justice and the Department of Health and Human Services collected over $4 billion in healthcare fraud proceeds, money going back to the taxpayers. And for every $7 recovered, it was a $1 investment. So it's a great return on investment by the federal government in going out and finding proceeds of healthcare fraud. We've worked on cases like that in our district. We recently had a settlement with a hospital system in West Virginia and Ohio where there were Stark Act violations, and we settled the case for over $4 million.
What are Stark Act violations?
It's basically an anti-kickback law. It's in place to prevent hospitals from engaging in inappropriate compensation arrangements with doctors. In more plain language, the law is set up to discourage hospitals from overpaying doctors with the hope that doctors will then make perhaps unnecessary referrals to Medicare and Medicaid for procedures to be done at that hospital. And so we discovered that there were compensation arrangements with physicians that were above and beyond what fair market value would dictate the physician should be paid. And further investigation showed that they were referring a lot of procedures to this particular hospital or hospitals. And so we reached a settlement with the hospital of just under $4 million, and we're also investigating the doctors who were involved, and we'll go after those folks as well to make them pay back the proceeds that they should not have received.
We're talking about the work of a United States Attorney. My guest is the United States Attorney for the Northern District of West Virginia, William J. Ihlenfeld II. I'm Dan Ringer, and this is The Law Works. You've also had a number of investigations going on related to healthcare services that either weren't provided or weren't provided to the standard that they are supposed to be provided.
Mm-hmm. We have. We worked on some cases and have some pending cases right now, one involving an ambulance company that was transporting patients that didn't need transportation. And that company had to pay over $1 million back to the federal government because they billed for transportation that wasn't necessary. We've also had cases involving doctors that were rendering services, or rather billing for services that they weren't actually rendering, and billing the government for those services. And we investigated and uncovered that, and go after the individuals involved, and also go after the money to try and get that back for the taxpayer. You've
also had cases involving nursing homes where the standard of care just wasn't what it was supposed to be.
That's correct. And that's something that we take very seriously. We've got a civil division, we've got civil attorneys that look at those cases on a regular basis and make sure that nursing homes are held accountable if they don't provide the care that they should be providing.
One of the things I see in the news a lot now, and it took me a little while to, I think, begin to understand it, what's wrong with bath salts?
Bath salts is something I think your audience is going to be hearing a lot about, unfortunately, in 2012.
What's wrong with a relaxing bath?
Well, it's not really what you think it is. It says on the label, not for human consumption, but unfortunately people are consuming these substances. People are dying, people are getting extremely sick, people are overdosing, people are becoming addicted and developing these terrible habits. And they're not what they appear to be, and they shouldn't be consumed.
They're not really bath salts?
They're not.
What are they?
They are, the best way to describe it is they're similar to methamphetamine or cocaine or ecstasy. It's a synthetic cathinone, and it's something that is addictive. It's something that gives somebody a feeling similar to those drugs that I mentioned, and it's something that's being sold right out in front of us, in some cases in stores that you might see in a shopping plaza or just down the street. And so We're very concerned with it, and it's something that we're aggressively looking into and will be continuing to look into in the months and years to come.
And these are synthetic drugs, basically.
They are. And synthetic marijuana is also an issue that we're looking at.
Does that function like regular marijuana?
Unfortunately, for the users, it does not. The only thing similar, the similarity between the synthetic marijuana and regular marijuana is it's a leafy substance. But the side effects of the synthetic marijuana are much more dangerous, much more serious. We've had overdoses there, heart attacks experienced by teenagers, body functions shutting down. It has effects that people don't expect them to have, and even drug users are saying, look, I've tried a lot of different drugs, but I would stay away from the synthetic marijuana and the synthetic bath salts because it does things that you're not expecting and that you don't want to have happen.
So even the professionals say don't do this.
And that's what really is scary. The professionals, the professional drug users are saying don't use this stuff. It's dangerous.
Your office is also involved in environmental issues.
We are.
What do you do?
Well, we're living in a day and age that we've never experienced before. In fact, there were some industry experts that were up in Wheeling a couple weeks ago that said the northern panhandle in Wheeling is the dead center of the Marcellus and Utica shale drilling activity in the United States. We've got very rich wet gas in our area. It's extremely valuable, and so there's a lot of drilling activity, and we have billion-dollar corporations that are coming into West Virginia that are fracking and pulling the natural gas up from underneath our ground. And it's terrific for the economy. Our hotels are full, our restaurants are packed, jobs are being created. But as the U.S. Attorney, I have the job of making sure that the environmental laws are followed, that the water is kept clean, that the Clean Water Act isn't violated, that the Clean Air Act isn't violated. And so I think there can be a balance. I think we can have both this great economic development plus clean air and clean water. And I see it as my responsibility to make sure that West Virginia is the same now as it is in 100 years. The President just said we might have a 100-year supply of natural gas, but we have to be careful in how we develop it, and we have to develop it safely. And I have to make sure that we do develop it safely.
You're also involved in coal mine safety.
That's correct.
What is your involvement there?
Well, we have underground coal mines in the Northern District, and last year, unfortunately, we had to prosecute some cases involving coal miners who falsified documents. We had a couple of cases involving miners who said that they were certified to be mine foremen when they actually weren't, and they did so to get a bump in pay. And they were caught and they were prosecuted and convicted. And we have other cases involving falsification of mine records and suppression of monitors in mines in order to keep mines open, things that put our miners' safety in jeopardy. And we work with MSHA and other investigators to make sure that that doesn't happen, and if it does, that the folks involved are held accountable.
A lot of this was related to the Sago mine explosion. 29 miners were killed there. Are you at liberty to discuss whether there may be additional prosecutions concerning that particular disaster in the future?
I'm not, but I can tell you that we're actively working on investigations right now within our office that relate to mine safety, and we'll continue to investigate those matters.
We just have a minute or so left. One of the things I wanted to touch on was that as we are recording this program, this is the first anniversary, if you can say anniversary, concerning the death of Derek Hotzenpiller, who was a Deputy United States Marshal, was killed in the line of duty. Can you tell us a little bit about Derek and the work of the Marshal Service with your office?
Well, Derek was a young man who last year was part of a fugitive apprehension team that was looking for a man who was a fugitive and was in Elkins, West Virginia. And Derek led the team into the house where they believed this man was located. And the man who they were looking for opened fire and shot and killed Derek Hotzenpiller. He also shot 2 other Deputy United States Marshals who fortunately survived. Derek was one of the best and the brightest. He was brand new to the Marshal Service. He had a history of law enforcement in his family. His father and his brother were both involved in law enforcement. His brother still is. And we lost a great man that day. But he died doing what he loved to do, and that was serving as United States Marshal. The Marshal Service does a lot for the district, and we're very lucky to have great deputies throughout the Northern District.
Bill Ihlenfeld, United States Attorney. Thank you, Bill, for being with us.
Thank you, Dan.
And thank you also for being with us. On behalf of the Law Works, I'm Dan Ringer. Good evening. On the Law Works website at thelawworks.org, you'll find a listing of recent The Law Works programs, additional information about this show's topic, and video of this and recent shows. You can also find the Law Works programs on YouTube and iTunes. If you would like to suggest a topic for a future The Law Works show, or if you're a school teacher and would like to receive a DVD of this show for classroom use, send us email at thelawworks@comcast.net or visit us on Facebook.
The Law Works is produced in cooperation with the West Virginia Bar Foundation, the Mountain State Bar, the Monongalia County Bar Association, and the West Virginia University College of Law. The Law Works is made possible by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and legal system, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. By the generous support of Software Systems Incorporated, a West Virginia company established in 1975, providing high-end support services, programming, and consulting for county government AS400 mid-range computer systems, as well as PC-based systems. And by viewers like you.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.